As if the people of Kunduz hadn't seen enough destruction and loss. They salvage what they can from the smouldering market. Now the Taliban is back. Anyone who worked for the Afghan government has fled or is in hiding. Women and girls live in fear. Fighting is reported on the outskirts of the town. But there in the centre, the Taliban flag shows who's in charge. Many residents just ran. Today, the Taliban deputy leader put out a message instructing their forces to protect people's lives and properties. But that's not what's happening on the ground. In jeeps and on motorbikes, they're sweeping across Afghanistan like a deadly swarm, moving faster and further than predicted, taking advantage of the disarray left behind by the Americans and other NATO forces. In the last 4 days, 6 provincial capitals have fallen to the Taliban. Zaran, Sheberghan, Talikan, Saripul, Kunduz and today Aibak. Herat, Kandahar and Lashkargah are besieged. The grey area under government control, which includes the capital Kabul, is shrinking by the day. Zaranj, the capital of Nimroz province, fell on Friday when Afghan national forces just left town.
Nimroz was threatened from all sides. We raised our voices before because there wasn't a big force in Nimroz. Over the years, the number of police, army and border police wasn't enough. The government didn't pay proper attention to this province. Whether you call it failure, lack of attention, corruption or whatever. That's what resulted in the handing over this province to the Taliban so easily.
Talibs ripped down the portrait of President Ashraf Ghani. His government has failed to provide the army with the provisions and weaponry it needs, and troops are demoralized after the Americans' rapid withdrawal.
You speak of a special forces commander in the province of Laghman that I spoke to. He was surrounded for 3 months, and he had to basically eat leaves and other stuff, running without water. So I think there are many different factors, and the Taliban also offered an insurance policy where it said, if you don't fight with us, we will not kill you, we will not harm you, just hand over your weapon to us.
Today, the Afghan Ministry of Defense put out video of airstrikes and claimed their soldiers are fighting back.
Enemy attacks continue. Still, fortunately, the Afghan security and defence forces are resisting them, and we have made progress in Kunduz and other cities. The enemy has suffered heavy casualties.
In the last few hours, Afghan special forces have been seen on the outskirts of the northern city of Mazar al-Sharif, where the Taliban have pushed forward. The Talibs clearly have a strategy. They took rural areas, then border posts, and are now moving on provincial capitals. Some residents of Kunduz are camping in a park in Kabul. 300,000 Afghans have fled their homes so far this year. But what if the Taliban take Kabul? What if civil war spreads further? Many thousands will flee to neighbouring countries, and Afghanistan will go back to the dark ages of cruelty, terror and despair.
Well, we're joined now by the former diplomat Annie Pforzheimer. She was the US Deputy Chief of Mission in Afghanistan between 2017 and 2018, and by Javad Ludin, who served as Chief of Staff to the Afghan President Hamid Karzai and also as the country's Deputy Foreign Minister. Welcome to you both. Mr. Ludin, first of all, do you think the Afghan government can win this war against the Taliban?
Yes, potentially it can, but under the circumstances, it's an extremely disadvantageous situation. The Taliban have the momentum, and the way that the withdrawal of the US and NATO forces has taken place, and also the way that the transition has not really been managed well, has put the Afghan government side in an extremely weak situation. So I think I'm extremely worried for the situation for the time being. There's an extremely urgent need for an intervention that will have to come from the outside. Intervention
from
political,
whom?
I mean. Well, sadly, the way the US managed the transition, the way that the whole withdrawal of troops was announced and executed, has put the US in a situation where there is very little leverage right now that the US and NATO have. There are many actors that have come in now into the fray, and they have probably equally important voices now. Pakistan is perhaps the most important country right now. So what is required is, when I say intervention, and now the US being in a relatively weaker situation than it was before, ideally it will have to come from the UN. The United Nations Security Council has to convene. It has to bring regional powers. It has to bring in Western NATO powers and the United States, and they have to really put a stop to this, to the current, the military push for takeover of power, because the military push for takeover of power is not going to return Taliban simply to power like they used to have it 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It will lead to a civil war. It will lead to a breakdown of the state institutions in Afghanistan.
Okay,
and it
let's
will,
just, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to bring in Annie Forsheimer here, because you talked about the withdrawal of the US troops. Annie Forsheimer, the US launches an invasion, stays in Afghanistan for decades, and then withdraws abruptly. Do you think that was responsible behavior?
I think that the way that this withdrawal was announced, and the fact that all conditions were lifted from the US troop presence, the giving of a deadline, and honestly, the lack of planning that was manifest in the contradictory statements about how we were going to support our Afghan allies, all of it was very poorly managed. It was a strategic error, in my view, and it has led to this demoralizing effect on Afghan forces at the moment that they badly need to be able to push back on the Taliban, because the Taliban do not speak for Afghanistan, but they are willing to commit acts of terror in order to take as much territory as possible and to try to negotiate their way into power.
So we could see a future where the Taliban becomes the strongest force in Afghanistan. How do you think the US will react to that?
Well, at this moment, I can't see the US reacting adequately. I think that the United States should be making statements about our interest in sanctioning the Taliban for what they are doing, engaging the United Nations in a mediation role, or as a fact-finding body that can determine who is committing atrocities. The US could make a statement that it plans to continue its air support for the Afghan security forces. There are many ways that the United States government could be managing its support for the Afghan Republic and all of our allies and the vulnerable populations that believed in the project that we said we were conducting together of democracy and human rights.
Javad Ludin, US troops couldn't have stayed in the country forever. There is a responsibility on the part of the Afghan government, and it seems that we're seeing a lack of leadership. I mean, why isn't the president on the front line? Why are the troops so demoralized?
Well, I don't think that staying for the U.S. troops in a combat position was anybody's position. I mean, we've been in Afghanistan for many years. In fact, we've been calling for a transition to take place. But I think it's really the manner in which this transition was announced. Right up to the last minute, they were involved in all sorts of combat operations, and then suddenly just pulling the carpet from under their feet, the feet of the Afghan Republic, was what was shocking. The Afghan government, obviously, I mean, we take responsibility for what is there as Afghans, but what I'm basically saying is right now, the way that the United States handled the peace process over the last 2 to 3 years, where basically giving the Taliban the legitimacy, the political wherewithal, regional acceptance, all those things have combined, giving Taliban the kind of emboldened position right now that they're using to actually overrun provinces. This would not have been thinkable until a couple of years ago.
Okay, let's just quickly go to Annie Forsheimer. There's no incentive for the Taliban to negotiate. They're winning.
I think that is how they feel, and I think that's a very fair statement right now. I also believe, as does Jawed, that there are ways for the Afghan forces and people to fight back. But what they need is the international community to do its part. And And as he said, we gave them too much legitimacy. We took them at face value that they were interested in negotiating. They're not.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're running out of time. Annie Forsheimer, Javad Ludin, thank you both very much for joining us.